To thank the Brown County Historical Commission for the invitation to speak to the special dedication ceremony today. I spoke to a monthly meeting of the Historical Society back in November 1994 concerning a story I'll relate to you today about a former German POW who was sent to Camp Bowie following his capture in World War II. D-Day, June the 6th, 1944, the invasion of Normandy. It took 14 days for Americans, British and Canadian forces to establish a beachhead on the Normandy coast. On June the 20th, Allied forces began to break out of their position and set about their task to free France and Europe from the German forces. Exactly a week later, June the 27th, 1944, Ernst Gies was captured by American forces. His capture in Normandy then began a long trip with others, POWs, to Camp Bowie in Brownwood, Texas. He arrived at the railway station in Brownwood with hundreds of other POWs and were marched to Camp Bowie, where he would make his home for the next 2 years. Local people remember the distinct sound of the nail-clogged boots of the POWs as they marched from the railway station to Camp Bowie. Ernst Gies later said, "I look back on those 2 years when I was a prisoner of war as the best years of my life." Ernst Gies was 21 years old when he was captured. He further said, "I was glad when I was taken prisoner by the Americans. I had been having a hard time so far from home, and from that moment I was captured, I was happy. The Americans were always friendly to me." Following the end of World War II, along with 79,000 other German POWs in Texas, Ernst Gies returned to Germany to work in his dad's butcher shop. And for 46 years, and 46 years later, now 68, he had a burning desire to return to America. He wrote to the Brownwood Bulletin, and Harriet Graves received his letter. He wanted to know all about what had happened to Camp Bowie and to Brownwood. Harriet remembered that my dad may have been at Camp Bowie in the same time frame that Ernst Gies, the same time frame as Ernst Gies. And my father then, First Lieutenant A.J. Turner, had returned from Okinawa and was a chaplain at Camp Bowie. Harriet contacted my dad, and he volunteered to write to Ernst. And when he did, he sent some pictures and invited Ernst to come to Brownwood. Ernst wasted no time. The following week, my dad answered the doorbell of his home on Oak Park Terrace to find Ernst Gies at his door. He had flown nonstop from Frankfurt to Houston, rented a car, drove to Brownwood, and found my dad. He didn't know a word of English. The next day, Ernst had a nonstop flight from Dallas back to Germany, and my dad insisted that he not leave so quickly, invited him to stay with him and my mom. Ernst stayed 5 days and took a tour of Camp Bowie and Brownwood, which he had never seen in his former time as a POW at Camp Bowie. And I'd also like to mention that he did have his son-in-law with him, who served as his interpreter. It was like an old homecoming week. Ernst, while a POW, worked in the mess hall and cleaned chapels, and that's where my dad and he crossed paths. And similarly, he said, "I can remember my dad talking about his assignment at Camp Bowie and the fond memories of the POWs. They were friendly and they were trustworthy. They took pride in their work and were always on time." When it came time for Ernst to leave Brownwood a second time, he pulled from his luggage the POW shirt that you see here on display and that is also in the museum. And he gave that shirt to my dad. And after Ernst left, my dad asked me, "What should I do with the shirt?" And I told him it needed to be in our museum. And this is the story of this POW shirt that is displayed and that we see here in front of you. Finally, I'd like to say that I enjoy watching the American Pickers. It's on tonight. It's on the History Channel. Recently, one of the men stated there is a lot of old stuff just waiting to be picked from old farmhouses and old warehouses. But when something has a story behind it, then that's when it really becomes special. And I'd like to thank you for giving me an opportunity to share these comments with you. I would like to add one last thing. When I was stationed at Fort McClellan from 75 to 79, they had a German-Italian cemetery for the POWs, and I drove past this every day as I went to work. Last summer, July 11, I was in Alabama, went by and saw the cemetery. It's just like it was when it was left in 46. So that's in Alabama. Thank you very much for your attention.
I brought some of the exhibits from the museum. You saw Dr. Turner was talking about the shirt and the hat that Mr. Geese gave his father. We also have a list of all the men that were prisoners of war at the prisoner of war camp we got from the War Department. And then there's some copies of some inspections that were done. The camp had to meet certain standards, and I don't know how often the inspections were done. We have copies of the inspections and things they wanted improved. And Beverly Norris was going to be here to talk about the Camp Bowie exhibit at the museum, but she had to put her husband in the hospital in Abilene today. We have Judge West that's made it. I'm going to ask him to come make some comments.
Thank you, Ronnie. Yeah, I was hoping that they'd skip over. On behalf of Brown County, welcome to this dedication. Really about the only personal knowledge I have of the involvement of the prisoners of war as they were used for public projects. The German prisoners of war, I wasn't aware that were there Japanese prisoners here as well?
Only German in this one.
Only German in here. But they were used extensively, not in necessarily the construction of, but the upkeep of the Brownwood Country Club. They were in other public projects in the area. I believe at that time the reason the country club was considered public is because the officers used it extensively to play golf on, so it was part of the military complex. Anytime that we have a historical marker dedicated in this county, it's always a privilege to be a part of it. So on behalf of the county, welcome to everybody here. Thank you, Judge Beth.
Our speaker today is Willie McWhorter. He's the program chairman of the military division of the Texas Historical Commission. I'll just let y'all welcome William McWhorter and give us a talk. Thank you.
All right, between the wind and the cars, we'll see if I can keep all these papers from flowing away. But good morning. It's a pleasure to see so many people out here today. As Chair Lappy said, my name is William McWhorter, and I work at the Texas Historical Commission in Austin on the military sites, and I'm also the Oral History Program Coordinator there. And our agency's preservation efforts are built on a network of 254 counties across the state. And it's at the local level where much preservation is handled. And to that end, I'd like to thank Chair Lappy and any other member here today. Please raise your hand of the Brown County Historical Commission for your efforts not only with the marker here today, but for the preservation that you work on a daily basis as members in this county. Thank you all for your efforts. Before I talk about our agency's Texas and World War II initiative and how Camp Bowie's prisoner of war marker behind you, which we'll unveil shortly, connects to that statewide project, I'd like to provide a brief background on our agency. Let that car go by. Maybe I'll get some honks too. The state legislature established our agency in 1953. At that time, we were the Texas State Historical Survey Committee. 20 years later, they changed our name to the Texas Historical Commission, and with that change also came more protective powers and broader educational responsibilities. Our staff consults with citizens and organizations to preserve Texas's archaeological, architectural, and cultural landmarks through a variety of programs that help to preserve and promote the economic benefit of such topics as county courthouses, downtown Main Street programs, commercial districts or archaeological sites, and of course military sites, which is where I come in. In addition to participating in today's ceremony, I've had the chance to work with Chair Lappy and members of the Brown County Historical Commission on our World War II preservation efforts over the past few years. They've greatly aided my personal research in telling the real stories of Brown County during World War II, which include not only Camp Bowie and its prisoner of war camp, but also Brownwood Army Airfield and the local home front stories of Brown County during World War II, all part of a survey of more than 1,800 sites across the state of Texas. Today we've gathered to commemorate Camp Bowie's prisoner of war camp and the United States soldiers in uniform who served here during the war, part of a larger encompassing war effort, as well as the local civilian need and action to locate this prisoner of war camp here. As one of nearly 70 prisoner of war camps that detained enemy combatants and alleviated labor shortages across the state of Texas, Camp Bowie's POW camp is one of the few that is preserved as well as it is through the historical record thanks to the research done by the Brown County Historical Commission. More than 750,000 Texans, men and women, served in the military during World War II. And of that, a larger minority population and a women's effort was made possible due to the change that took place in Texas during World War II. The war modernized and it urbanized much of our great state. So to place that World War II military site, Camp Bowie's prisoner of war camp, into a historical context, allow me to do the following. 69 years ago, little more than a year before the Allied invasion of Northern Europe, known as D-Day, on the beaches of France, and nearly 2 years before the Marine and Naval invasion of the island of Iwo Jima in the Pacific, the U.S. Provost Marshal General's Office and the War Manpower Commission continued their efforts to establish prisoner of war camps across the United States. And Camp Bowie's POW camp, already established already here at the Camp Bowie Infantry and Artillery Training Post, was one of those sites. In October of 1942, word reached Camp Bowie Command that there was a need to establish a POW camp that could house up to 3,000 enemy combatants, which ultimately would be located here, southwest of the site of Camp Bowie. Again, looking back at the year 1942, the first full year of U.S. involvement in World War II, the camp was referred to as an internment camp. Now, this word internment would go on to have multiple meanings during World War II. Many of you are probably aware of the War Relocation Authority camps that moved Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans from the West Coast into the interior, or the Department of Justice camps, which held Japanese, German, and Italian enemy aliens during World War II. But here, we're talking about enemy combatants, Germans, held at one of nearly 70 camps across the state. Mostly Germans, but a few Italians and a few Japanese. Because ultimately, Texas would go on to hold nearly 50,000 POWs during World War II in these camps. The service branch of the War Production Board recommended placing these POW camps at U.S. Army posts such as Camp Bowie because of the multiple benefits that they would provide. The POWs themselves could help free up soldiers from such duties as massive laundry services, litter control, construction projects. And also, in 1942, the U.S. Army had little knowledge or little experience in guarding mass numbers of POWs, but it went on to meet the conditions of the 1929 Geneva Convention. And in doing so, they overcame their first initial obstacle. That was finding a way to control a base camp, such as Camp Bowie's, that would administer branch camps, smaller camps around the state. Now, Bowie never went on to have that mission as other camps such as Hearn or Hereford would have. But in doing so, it was set into place to hold a mass number of POWs that freed up positions in England as American soldiers and allies prepared for the invasion of Northern Europe. So growing up in South Texas, I found it quite humorous when I read some of those camp inspection reports that Chair Lappy shared, when the Protectorate nation of Germany, the Swiss legation, accompanied the Department of State and the War Department to visit the camp in 1942. And they said, I want this truck to go by because I want you to hear this. Camp Bowie was not very attractive and presented a somewhat drab experience. However, the reality is that the prisoners here were well provided for. They included hot meals, they included Red Cross packages opened by the prisoners, not their guards themselves, and in a timely manner, access to medical facilities, educational projects, and a few did corresponding courses with local colleges. This is a far cry from the treatment that American and Allied personnel received both in Europe and in the Pacific during World War II, but it's a testament to the men and women, whether they were from Texas or if they came to Texas to serve at Camp Bowie, took care of the POWs in an effort to show their correspondents in Germany and for a while Italy and also Japan that they were adhering to the Geneva Convention. Camp Bowie closed in December of 1945 and deemed surplus when the war was over. And today much of the camp is razed, including the POW camp. However, thanks to the efforts of the Brown County Historical Commission, this site is not forgotten. And a perfect example of this is the POW mural in the nearby former Servicemen's Club that a tour will take place after this dedication ceremony. There are very few examples of this rare form of art across the state of Texas, and Brownwood is lucky to have the one that they have. In conclusion, I'd like to say, without question, the POWs provided an efficient and a necessary source of labor to the men and women working at Camp Bowie and the enlisted men here during the war. When combined with stories of the U.S. soldiers who served at Camp Bowie, it adds a rich chapter to the already wealthy Lone Star Texas World War II history of Brown County. Thank you very much.